Hi, everyone. This is Tony Nash with Complete Intelligence. Thanks for joining us for another Quick Hit. We're joined today by Velina Chakarova. She's the head of the Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy. We're very lucky to have her today to talk to us about global supply chains and a bunch of other things. Velina, thanks so much for joining us. Can you tell us a little bit about the Institute and kind of what you do?
Thank you for inviting me. It's a great pleasure. The Austrian Institute for European and Security Policy is a think tank which works very closely with Austrian and European institutions, and we provide a macro perspective, or let's put it that way, 30,000 feet geoeconomic, geostrategic, geopolitical perspective on current and future developments in the fields of security and defense.
Perfect. That sounds really interesting, especially given Austria's history kind of on the border of Western Europe and kind of traditional Eastern Europe. But it seems to me that you're also seeing a lot and observing and commenting a lot on things that are happening in China. And we've started to see a lot of structural change in, let's say, Western diplomatic and political and economic relationships with China, as well as supply chains. So what we're seeing here in the States is a bit of a decoupling of supply chains from China and North America. So a little bit of reshoring. We're starting to see some momentum there. And I've been curious for a long time, is that same thing happening in Europe now? And what do you expect that to look like if that's the case?
This is a really very important question, and I don't have a ready answer for you, but I can provide you with two main narratives that are right now relevant for the situation here in Europe. Now, on the one side, there are indeed many statements coming from the highest ranking level. One of them was the French President Macron, or take the European Union Commissioner for Industry. And they were namely sharing this view that globalization had went too far. So basically now Europe has to take care of its own, they call it strategic autonomy. That means that in fields that are of strategic importance, specifically geoeconomic fields, take all these kind of sectors going beyond medical supplies and pharmaceuticals. We are not going to discuss this at all because it was quite obvious for all parts in the world how dependent they were, right? But strategic sectors, strategic industries, that some of them have to go back to Europe. Now, this is the one narrative. So European Commission, because we have a twofold track here in Europe. We have the member states, but we also have the European institutions. On the side of the so-called geopolitical commission, with the new president, which is a German foreign defense minister, there is this clear statement: we want to introduce a green transition, carbon-free economy by 2030, 2040. So that means, of course, dependencies on raw materials, on metals and stuff like that is going to be cut, and this is still in place because we know very well that China has a huge market share. Now, on the other side, there is also the narrative coming from highest ranking politicians and representatives that such thing as strategic autonomy in terms of global supply chains is not possible. And that these kind of COVID-19 responses were crisis related. So basically part of the reshoring was due to crisis response, to crisis management. And once things start working again, post COVID-19, we are going to go back to business. Now, we know that certain European member states have very strong geoeconomic interests in expanding relations with China. And right now, I can name one of these countries, that's Germany. We are in the middle of, so basically the German presidency of the European Council has begun, and there is no secret that the topic China was on the top of the agenda for the next 6 months. Now, with the shift that you mentioned in terms of certain perceptions when it comes to dependencies on China, things are going to move slower, so will be slower. That means investment deal negotiations that were planned are not going on according to the pre-COVID-19 plans. So investment deal between Europe and China is a very important point. Investment screenings, buying up of companies in Europe that have declared defaults, all of these things are going to be on the agenda for the next 6 months. So in reality, there is a debate on reconfigurations of global supply chains going back to Europe. But on the other side, there is also an expectation, let's go back to business, because the economies have been struck and have been hit very hard by COVID-19. And so we are right now somewhere in between.
Very interesting. And, I remember when you, was it 5 or 8 years ago when there were a number of infrastructure pieces that were sold to Chinese SOEs, right? In the Port of Piraeus, I think in Greece, we had the Portuguese electric utility. We had a number of things that were actually sold to Chinese SOEs. That's been slowed down quite a bit, which is really interesting. So in terms of supply chains, I was involved in that first generation of Eastern Europe build out of manufacturing in the mid to late 90s. And when China joined the WTO, we saw a lot of that manufacturing and the fixed asset investment associated with it move to China in the first half of the 2000s and then accelerate. Do you expect a scenario where we see reinvestment in Central and Eastern Europe for regional manufacturing? Is that, do we expect kind of a rebirth of that manufacturing? Or is that something that's a bygone era? We're going to continue to see centralization of manufacturing in China or other parts of Asia, and Central and Eastern Europe is kind of passé. It's kind of very 20 years ago.
Well, another important question, of course. Well, we have to tell first and foremost the facts. And the facts are that 2/3 of the trade that takes place within the European Union is actually an intrastate trade. It's taking place between the member states. So in that kind of context, there will be no necessity actually for reconfigurations at all. But what I am expecting to happen is that due to this decoupling between United States and China, and also due to the increasing awareness in the European capitals in terms of dependencies on China, there will be reconfiguration to some extent. So partial reconfiguration, which will be initiated, will be supported by the European institutions. The very fact that we have a European Commissioner now for industry points to the fact that there is now an increasing realization how important this is. And in that matter, there will be certainly, in my expectation is that there will be certainly a partial reconfiguration coming back to Europe, not just manufacturing. We are talking also about digitalization, that it has to take place. We are still actually in the middle of the process. We are in the middle of the process of a fourth industrial revolution. Just let me remind you that 6 months ago, there was no discussion, almost no discussion, on 5G Huawei being actually initiated and supported by Huawei, by Chinese company. Now, with COVID-19, there are already strong signals and decisions in United Kingdom, in France. Now the expectation is also that there will be some similar reaction in Germany, that a 5G being introduced by Chinese company Huawei will not be in the interest of European sectors. So this kind of digital transition will certainly be also part of this reconfiguration of global supply chains. This kind of processes that are ongoing right now are going to partially, like I said, we should not expect too much, but there will be certain expectations are already in place that this is going to happen.
Okay, let me ask you one last question. We've talked about from Complete Intelligence for the past couple of years how our hypothesis has been that Europe would be the biggest loser of a US-China trade war. And the reason we expect that is once China cannot export its deflation to the US, it will have to export that capacity to Europe, because Japan has already, after the 2012 kind of protest of Japanese factories, all that stuff, Japan's already ramped down its imports from China. So as the US is, gradually decoupling, it just seems that it's likely that more deflationary goods will go to Europe and potentially hollow out European manufacturing even more. Is that something Europeans are thinking about? Are they talking about this? Are they preparing for it? Or is that something that just seems a little bit kind of too far out there?
To be honest, right now, I have the feeling that our stakeholders and political decision makers are preoccupied with coping with the post-COVID-19 social economic repercussions. So it's all about the recovery plan. It's all about how to revive the economies. So there is no serious debate right now on that matter, but I think this is a very important issue that you've addressed. And I've been thinking about it, that right now, from a current perspective, I don't see how Europe has a strong position, a strong card on that matter, because on the one side, as you mentioned, there is this systemic decoupling taking place. On the other side, there is a trade surplus between the European Union and United States, and we all know that the U.S. President Trump is not in favor of institutions such as European Union. So I'm expecting major steps towards probably tariffs introductions or other pressure that he will probably impose on the European Union in order to provide a strong narrative for, prior to the US election. So the geo-economic relations between the United States and the European Union, that means the European member states, are going to deteriorate. That's my expectation. And so long as this is the case, and in terms of re-election, this is going to be further the case, of course, political decision makers in Europe would have to find another ally, geo-economic ally. So my expectation is that they will probably look for, for solidifying business interests. That's why I mentioned at the beginning that this narrative of going back to business with China is quite strong right now in European capitals, without thinking of the long-term implications. I'm not saying that I personally agree with it, but I'm just outlining the reality the way it is. Okay, so in this triangle, I don't, and of course you mentioned Japan. There are also other strong regional partners and regional players. Here, the European Union has on the one side a regional card to play with the European Commission. How? Through trade deals. This is something that they are going to push for. But on the other side, when it comes to the member states, where the political narrative is being still pushed and decided on in the capitals, and right now it's all about the French-German axis because of the exit of the UK from the European Union. Then, of course, I expect that there will be further push for solidifying business relations with China in order to have a sort of an exit plan for in case that relations with the United States deteriorate. In the European capitals, everyone is hoping for Joe Biden to win the election in November, because if that is not going to be the case, the expectation is that the relations, specifically, like I said, in terms of geoeconomics, they are going to deteriorate.
A lot to think about. Velina, thank you so much for your time. I do hope we can reconnect in a few months just to see how this stuff kind of bears out over the next few months. And again, thank you so much for your time. This has been really, really helpful for us.
Thank you for having me, and stay safe and sound.
Thank you very much.